When it's just blank paper, if somebody wants to take notes or like whatever. So, yeah, this we had talked last week a little bit about doing, getting into like social issues, starting to get into more social issues. Um, and I kind of thought about it and was like, well, which social issue? That's a lot. Like, there's so many different things going on right now that we could be talking about. So I felt like I wanted to kind of preface getting into that. Um, so, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulil Kareem. To put kind of the concept of social issues, political issues in context, I wanted to look at just the very basic concepts of morality and ethics in Islam, and then like the Western secular kind of perspective on that. So ethics, or morals, basically, in kind of the Western modern concept is, something concerned with principles of right and wrong, behaviors of good and bad, and those are kind of an internal thing. Your morals is kind of your internal compass. Ethics is sort of the external application of those things, the rules that allow you to stay within your moral bounds in the Western secular sense. Now, in Islam, the rough equivalence would basically be the fitra, which is, our innate nature given to us by Allah, which is going to determine our morals. And then Sharia, which is kind of the external application of things that are good for the fitra and not harmful to us, things that Allah loves and avoiding things He does not love. The Prophet ﷺ was reported to have said I think this is in Musnad Ahmad, I've only been sent to perfect good character or good morals, good moral behavior. So, morality and ethics, they're distinct, but they're pretty interconnected. These two principles can definitely be in conflict, particularly the secular version versus the Islamic version. It's, in the Western sense, ethics, they kind of view morality. Is that somebody? Come in. Assalamu alaikum. It's not even closed all the way. You can come. Yeah, so from the Western perspective, did they run away? They changed their mind. From the Western perspective, you typically end up with a flawed sort of system where you either have, whatever governing body or cultural group enforcing its chosen kind of code of ethics on everybody, disregarding their personal moral values. Or you have individuals pushing their personal moral values onto everybody else, regardless of everyone else's position. And the Western viewpoint on religious-based ethics. In America, it's fine to have your religious morals, but you keep those to yourself. Like, that shouldn't be anybody else's business but yours. And when you start talking about it too much, people don't like it. And the perspective tends to be that, religious morality and therefore ethics based on that morality is dangerous because it's something that's so rigid, and that's just not a thing that's socially acceptable in modern Western culture. But the reality is that secular morality and ethics are very subjective. There's no higher influence or defining factor than each individual's opinion, basically. Whatever's popular in society at the time, whatever modern culture has encouraged becomes ethical. And so it's very flawed, it's very fluid, but that's, I think, its downfall in a way. And again, it's, it views personal morals as it's a you problem, and the Western perspective of the purpose of ethics is that it's basically an evolutionary response. That's kind of the modern psychological argument, is that ethics is kind of something we developed as a race to basically compensate where our genetic ability and instincts couldn't couldn't get us any further. We developed to a certain point of intelligence, and so we needed this system that we had to kind of make up to function as a society. Um, but this line of thinking is problematic because obviously, if we managed to evolve to a certain point without ethics, at what point did it become necessary and why did it become necessary? It's sort of a chicken or an egg problem. It's, if we were able to develop that far, why did we suddenly need laws and ethics? Um, and if we didn't have laws and ethics, how were we able to develop that far? So basically, the Islamic perspective on this is going to be that our advancement as a species didn't force us to develop morals and ethics, but the other way around. That we were created with this innate sense of good and righteousness, and that brought us to be a social race of beings because it's part of how we were created. We were created to live in societies, we were created to live together, and to basically try and get along. So, that inherent morality, the fitra, the nature that Allah gave us, created us all on of just basic goodness. It pushed us to take care of each other, to look out for each other, to not harm each other unnecessarily, and therefore we developed a society, just kind of as a default. And so basically, when we wander too far from that fitra, we end up with problems. One interesting example of this, and this is just me kind of being a nerd for archaeology stuff. If you guys have heard of, there's these ruins, it's, I guess, modern Turkey, and I don't know how to say it, Göbekli Tepe, something like that. I'm probably saying that wrong because Turkish is hard. But basically, this is a series of ruins that, was built around 10,000 years before agriculture developed. And it's just kind of destroyed the old archaeological idea that religion was a product of cultural stability. Basically, we learned to farm, and so we built cities because we could build cities, and then we got bored, and astaghfirullah, we invented God, basically, is kind of the, archaeological modern perspective on that. And obviously, these are religious ruins. They were ceremonial in some way. We're not really clear on how. There's not any written writing or anything. And basically, the society that formed there formed because of this place of worship that they had built. They weren't able to farm or anything at the point. When they built it, they were still hunter-gatherers. But what it's looking like is that to maintain this religious site, they taught themselves to farm so that they could stay there and maintain the place, which I thought was really interesting because, up until then, archaeologists and such were kind of running with this premise that, basically just bored people in villages invented religion. So anyways, basically, our innate fitra, our nature as Muslims, as, Allah intended us to be, drove us to build societies, to settle, to manipulate the world around us, to allow us to continue to perform our function as worshiping Allah, as, giving rights to our neighbors, to our families. And, the basic answer in Islam that Sharia and Fitra are complementary systems. The Fitra and the Sharia are never going to be in conflict. If there's a conflict, it's because one or the other has gotten corrupted somehow. Either the Sharia is being misrepresented, or you've lost touch with that Fitra, and so you're not able to really comprehend it anymore. You're not able to make sense of it. And Allah says in the Quran, this is Surah Ar-Rum, verse 30, I think. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Set your face to the deen in sincerity, which is Allah's fitra, upon which He created mankind. There is no changing the creation of Allah. This is the right deen, but most people know not. And, Allah created all of us with this, I don't want to say morality, because again, that's one of many words that means something very different to your typical English speaker. Like it's seen as something subjective that you just kind of make up as you go along. And fitra is not that. It's much more innate. It's much more part of just our being as humans. It's just our natural state. And Sharia, again, is the laws given by Allah, the ways of managing our lives and ourselves and our environment and our societies to benefit ourselves in that way. So the relevance of this, because I'm rambling a little. Basically, as we get into discussions around society, around social issues, around politics, around culture, you're always going to run into that kind of issue where do you argue it from the secular standpoint, where you're just supposed to disregard religion and disregard that fitra, or the other way around? Because anyone who's been to public school or university classes has probably run into a lot of, if not expressly, implied sort of judgment about how someone who bases their morals on religion is just, you're inherently backwards. You're kind of ignorant, like, oh, you poor thing. Like, that's not how we do it here. If you hold too tightly to those religious, morals and ethics, the accusation you're typically going to run into is that basically we can't function without some sort of threat of punishment. Like, you can't make your own decisions. You need somebody to like threaten you with hellfire to behave. That, the good deeds are it's forced. It doesn't have as much meaning because your religion told you to do these good things, which is, the point is that that's absurd because anybody who isn't basing their morals or ethics on religion is basing it on something else. They're basing it on cultural norms. They're basing it on, their secular education background. They're basing it on their family, upbringing. They're basing it on their, whatever. There's a basis for it, but it's much more, changeable and subjective if you're not getting it directly from the source. And the reality is that both a Muslim and anybody else have the same starting point. We're all starting with the same fitra. We're all starting with that same, sort of origin of where our morals should come from. And sometimes, a secularist or an atheist or a Christian or whatever will get it right. They'll stick to those issues. And that's, Allah guides who He wills. But it's not somehow less, that argument that are doing good because we believe Allah wants us to do good is somehow less, legitimate than doing good because, like, you took a class and they told you that it's nice to, like, feed homeless people or something. So in reality, modern Western secular morality it's just each individual's attempt to, very often drown out the fitra so that they can accept whatever is ethically, like, in right now. And there's so much struggle and internal conflict going on, and external conflict going on in cultures because it's just not something you can do. The fitra is always there. As much as you can try and silence it, you can read all sorts of books, you can do all sorts of things to try and reason your way out of it. It's there in everybody. It's there in everybody. And so as we get into social issues, that's kind of the framing that, I want to encourage everybody to keep, that there's going to be a lot of indoctrination that maybe I think a lot of people don't even realize they've gotten. Where if you've grown up here or even lived here for a number of years, it's very easy to get taken in by the, just the talking in circles, the justification, the whataboutism that goes on in the education system, in the culture, in the media, where the modern idea that anything's okay as long as you can justify it to yourself. And that's not the source of our logic in Islam. The source is the fitra, it's the sharia, it's what Allah has given us. And so we have to keep in mind that if there's that conflict, there's either something wrong with we're ignoring our fitra or we're misunderstanding, right? If there's something in the sharia that we don't comprehend, we should try and think good of Allah, and we should assume, like, I just don't get it, and if there's something in modern secular ethics that clashes, a question that very often kind of comes up is, well, why would Allah, this, and this. And that's not the right way to frame the question. We want to frame it as, what am I not understanding about this? And we won't always have those answers. That was one of the hardest things for me to accept coming into Islam, is that you don't get the answers for every question. That's just not the reality. Dunya is, it's pretty shallow compared to everything. So we have to sometimes accept that there's some things we won't understand. There's some places where we cannot, sort of match up what Islam tells us with what the rest of the world is trying to tell us. And I'm sure we'll get into some of those issues. So I just kind of wanted to briefly go over that, and sort of a disclaimer for coming talks, because we hadn't really gone into specifically what social issues we wanted to start with. But there's a lot of them. There's the obvious ones. There's dating, there's homosexuality, there's a million politics, there's voting, there's all these different things. And some of the answers are going to be maybe and sometimes, and some of them are going to be absolutely not. And some of them are going to be in conflict with what all of our teachers and friends at school and employers and everybody else have said. So that was a little rambling, but hopefully it was somewhat coherent. And inshallah, if you guys have any questions or any specific topics you wanted to go into today, I just kind of wanted to do that opening disclaimer framing kind of discussion to set the tone for talking about social issues before we really dive into it. Or if you guys had any questions from last time, did you see the video I posted about the washing in Haid? I don't think so.
Okay.
Well, I posted one to answer the specific question last time about if you can wash someone who's died while you're in Haid. Yes. I was in my van in the parking lot getting groceries. So I was like, oh yeah, let me do this video. So that one is on. I have an Instagram page. Again, it doesn't always, for some reason, it won't let me record more than 20 minutes. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. But I do. I think I emailed that to you guys. So, do you guys have any kind of just stuff you've run into that's similar to that, where you've been stuck in one of those debates with somebody where you've got some examples, really?
I think it was last week where all our classes are on Zoom right now. So
Right.
Yeah. One of the assignments was every night we do the readings and then we ask questions. We have to ask 4 questions about the readings. And I asked the question about and I asked the question, but I was using the words just and unjust.
Uh-huh.
And my teacher was flipping out. She was talking about who defines what's just and unjust, and how
Exactly.
justice is basically defined by the norms of society.
Right.
And I was like,
Subjective.
it's
Right.
so subjective that no one can even agree on what's right and wrong. So
Exactly.
it's just how are we supposed to live in a society when you guys can't even agree?
And that's why it doesn't usually work on any large scale.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. Yeah, that was that concept. I think you guys said you already watched my video, so I won't ramble on about it. But the first kind of debate that made me aware of God was discussing subjective and objective truth. Because if you're an atheist, if you're a secularist, if you're a modernist, you have to accept, it's built in. You have to accept that everything is subjective. Everybody's got their own opinion, and you have to respect that, and you have to accept it as valid, and just as valid as any other opinion. And there's a difference between respecting something and accepting it, and that's just kind of it's a necessary part. It's right up there with Darwinian evolution. You have to accept subjective truth. But when someone actually put the question to me, do you genuinely believe that there's no such thing as right and wrong? Because that's what you're really saying. When you break it down, there is no such thing as right and wrong, because there's no uniting objective factor to make that exist. And I was just like, well, no, that's ridiculous. Of course there's right and wrong. Of course murdering someone is a bad thing to do. We're intelligent, conscious, self-aware beings. Why would it be okay to murder somebody? And that just kind of made me pause and be like, well, wait a minute. If I'm going to say that like every human being knows that that's wrong, evolution doesn't justify that, you know, culture doesn't justify that, not every culture, but somehow in basically every culture in the world, it's understood on some level that that's not an okay thing to do. So yeah, it's kind of astonishing how very intelligent people um, can just get so caught up, I think, in playing devil's advocate that they lose sight of just common sense. You know, that seems to be what it is you just get so busy in the argument of wanting to be open-minded and wanting to be subjective that you lose sight of just the reality. Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, especially in today's like capitalist society, if you don't really have a basis for what you think is moral or just, and everyone's just trying to make money, you're gonna end up exploiting people.
Absolutely.
And
Oh, don't get me
there's
started on capitalism. We'll go on. We'll be here all night. Yeah.
yeah,
No, it's kind of frightening because yeah, it's if all morality is subjective, then it can change. It can change monthly. It can change it, and it does. It does. Um, if you look at a lot of the historical social issues, slavery is a great example. If you get to decide what is and isn't right, then you get to decide who's even a human being and who's not. Who's worthy of freedom and who's not. If we feel like we're somehow qualified to make those kinds of calls, it's really arrogance, is what it really comes down to. I joke with my husband that atheists are just the most arrogant possible beings that exist. It just doesn't get any more arrogant than not only saying, like, I can make my own decisions, I don't need any guidance, but there is no guidance. And, it's just, I know everything. Like, I can, if you give me enough time and enough books, I could learn everything there ever was to learn.
like books were written by
Right,
people who
exactly. No, exactly. Exactly. It's I think very emotionally immature way of thinking is what it really comes down to. And I think that's why you don't meet many old atheists. I think most atheists kind of end up where I was, where you're like mid-20s and you're finally becoming an adult. You were maybe a little emotionally stunted as a teenager and you're finally like growing up a little and you're like, wait a minute, am I really like the be all end all of like existence? Am I really like that spectacular? So I can't imagine trying to go through my basic education as like a believing person. I think I had that advantage in a way that I was an atheist all through my education. And so I could just kind of swallow it all and not really question it, not really be bothered by too much. So I can't imagine that frustration of having to try and convince someone who's supposed to be teaching you that something like justice is like a reality. That's it's crazy. It's crazy. Right. Right.
yeah. I feel like eventually you're gonna end up like going more towards one. Like so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine. No, I can't imagine. I I was yeah, that's just the nature of growing up, of coming into adulthood, is you want to figure out where you belong in the world. And like you don't want to be strange and not to any large degree. You want to be quirky maybe, but you don't want to be like a total outcast in society and in whatever culture you're part of. So I can imagine that that's extremely difficult. I mean, I went to school with I grew up in Texas. I went to middle school and high school in like Southeast Texas, which is like deep Bible Belt country. And I went to school with some very strict religious kids, but most of them were not real, they were in that place where it's like, yes, I have these beliefs, but I'm going to put them over here because I really want to hang out with you guys and like be
Mhm.
cool and not like feel like I'm left out. So and I feel like this idea that is being pushed in so much of education and culture now that everything is subjective just makes it even more confusing
Mhm.
because you're supposed to just leave your religion at home and come to
Yeah.
school and like then you can go back to it later, but just don't bring it around here. It's weird. It
Yeah.
makes us uncomfortable. Like, don't make us think about these things, you know.
Mhm.
But yeah, I blame capitalism.
And it also like opens the door to so many things that have been introduced to society in the first place, like changing genders. I used to always have this conversation with my friends. Like, for example, if someone was doing, like, someone was being a blackfish, basically, is like trying to change their appearance to be black, or changing, or like bleaching their skin to look white.
Right.
That's a huge issue. Oh, you're changing your race. That's not okay. But then when it comes to changing gender, it's like it's okay. And
Right.
like a lot of the times they would say, but with race there's like history behind it. And I'm like, with gender there's history
There is
behind it.
absolutely, yeah.
It's the
Any,
same thing, but it's just
I,
like
especially I think men becoming women because so often it's such a like fetishized, like, superficial version of what a woman is. Like it's high heels and
yeah,
red lipstick and big hair,
they don't
which is
see
like
the rest
not
of it.
most of us.
Mhm.
Um, and you know, if you ask someone, you see interviews, because that was something even before I was Muslim, I really struggled with. It bothered me a lot. It bothered me a lot, this concept, because to me, it's like any other similar thing you would label as body dysmorphic disorder, and you would treat them. You know, you would put them on meds, you'd put them in hardcore therapy. You wouldn't like start lopping off body parts. But yeah, I watched lots and lots of interviews looking for something that made sense. And it's just over and over again, oh, well, he liked pink. One of my son's favorite colors is pink. That doesn't mean he's
Yeah.
a girl, you know, and I'm so grateful. I was such a tomboy when I was a kid. Like,
Mhm.
I hated dresses and I was always just playing in the dirt. And I'm so grateful that this wasn't a thing then, because I just wonder what teacher would have like put me in counseling and been like, oh, well, if you want to be a boy, you know,
Yeah. So
it's pretty terrifying how early they're starting to get into this with some kids too, because you don't even understand gender until after puberty. So how can you decide? No, it's
and
that's
then yeah, when you make a decision like that and they do surgery on kids, what are they gonna do then? Yeah.
right,
They're gonna grow up
right.
and what if they actually
Right.
like
There's a
yeah.
growing movement of people detransitioning and talking about how, you know, they were basically crying for help. Typically, the most common scenarios for, you know, for a woman to transition to male is some sort of sexual assault, a
Yeah.
history of sexual
Literally.
assault, and she just wants to disconnect from her body because it caused her this trauma, and so
Mhm.
she wants to. And that's always been a thing, like women becoming very self-conscious and things after suffering sexual assault, and instead of getting, you know, good therapy and treatment to help them like reclaim themselves as people, you mutilate them. You know, and that doesn't solve the problem, you're just burying it deeper. So it's no, it's that is a really frightening issue to me,
Mhm.
and it's become not just acceptable, but it's becoming enforced in some cultures. You know, it's like we were going towards destroying this idea of gender as like the social construct. We know that Allah created men and women differently. That doesn't mean girls have to like pink and boys have to like blue, and girls have to like jewelry and boys have to like getting dirty. That's not what that means.
Mhm.
You know, we have so many stories of women who were soldiers, who were fighters, you know, and men who were more flamboyant and wanted to stay home with their moms and not go fight, you know. And that wasn't a problem. It was not a problem.
Mhm.
And I think as a society, like in the 90s, 80s, we started moving towards kind of blurring that a little bit, not in the best way in Western culture, but towards accepting that women can be somewhat masculine and men can be somewhat feminine, and it
Mhm.
doesn't break anything, you know. And now we're like backing way off of that, and we're going to back to like, no, if you like dresses, you're a girl, and we can give you surgery to fix it.
Yeah.
It's no, it's a terrifying thing. I think people are taking for granted. It's I don't know. I feel like Western culture has so accepted gender roles and so enforced Western gender roles, not Islamic again, because they're very different. Um, that it's kind of like a shortcut almost. Like instead of dealing with a guy who wants to cry sometimes and like express his feelings, you just tell him he's a woman. Instead of dealing with a woman who doesn't want to be sexualized, you just tell her she's a man. It just like it's like we're not going to have this conversation. You guys just go over here and deal with your issues and come back when you've figured it out because we don't want to deal with it. Yeah, that's a big one. That's a great example of where, Islamic values are never going to line up with the Western perspective. You know, we can't say that someone who's psychologically, ill is like an evil person, but we can definitely look at the way society's dealing with it and say that it's just not helpful. It's not, again, little kids who are confused, putting them on all sorts of heavy duty drugs that we have no idea what the long term effects are, and changing their names, and it's crazy. It's really crazy stuff. Yeah. Do you guys have any other examples or thoughts on just kind of that clash? You missed most of the actual talk, but it was just me rambling about the difference between, the Western concepts of morality and ethics and the Islamic concepts of the fitra and sharia, which is basically you have the internal kind of compass and the external expression, and how the Western kind of secular version is purely subjective. You get to decide what your morals are, supposedly. That's not the reality because your internal perspectives are being shaped by everything around you. That's just a fact. The culture you live in, the things you expose yourself to, the friends you spend time with, the education you get, and how the Western world is trying to kind of pretend that Western morality and ethics are just this objective monolith when they're really not. They're really very subjective and fluid kind of thing. Trying to think of some other examples. I mean, the obvious, another one one of the things that actually initially interested me in Islam was hijab, and niqab, just as a rejection of the Western kind of idea that a woman becomes free by either by basically doing everything men want her to do, by becoming like this fantasy object, that somehow that's empowering, that somehow allowing yourself and embracing the fact that you're being sexualized is an empowering thing. And I just could not stomach that. Maybe it's because my mom was Catholic, I don't know, but I just couldn't. It always seemed absurd to me. Even as an atheist, it seemed absurd. Like, why do men get to set the standard for us? Why do I want to either be a man or be what he wants me to be? Like, why don't I get to decide? You know? So that was, and again, Islam, we acknowledge that men and women are created differently. We're very different. We have different things that we're good at. We have different weaknesses. We're supposed to support each other, rather than compete with each other. And a lot of the Western world seems to have lost sight of that. And it's just like a race to see who's better.
It's just crazy because it seems like it's completely like backwards. Like how you think of it. Like I feel like women who if a woman is trying to so hard to fit in with the standards and be exactly what a man wants her to be, like you're obviously oppressed. Like I don't know. It just seems so backwards.
Yeah. It's like I don't know if I got this from watching your videos or if it was a different lecture, but it was like this idea of feminism and it being like the complete like erasure of being like what a woman is.
Right.
I was like, yeah, it's just really upsetting to see that, especially I think I found this out like during Ramadan, like a lot of the things that a woman is, like Allah has made that noble for us, and for them
Right.
to turn around and make it like
It's a
something
flaw.
that's
Yeah.
it's so
And I think again that just goes into like when capitalism started, the main thing that like showed someone's like how important they were
yeah.
was money. And so women weren't making money, but the work they were doing like in the house and stuff like that, it's still important. But because it didn't make money,
Right.
they were no longer
It's
like relevant in society.
well, and I think it had to be deliberately devalued. I think it's bigger than that. I don't think it's that just incidentally lost value. I think that there was a lot of effort put into downplaying how valuable a woman's role in society is, and holding her up next to a man and saying, "Wouldn't you like to do this?" A lot of it in the U.S., during the world wars, men were gone and they really needed a workforce. And so they did these big campaigns to encourage women to go out and get jobs. And, they didn't want to lose that purchase market when the wars were over. So it's like, how do we keep women out working? We've got to downplay the role of being a housewife, downplay the role of being a mother, downplay marriage, because, you know, two people living independently have a much higher buying power than a couple living together with only one working. So it's, yes, again, capitalism. It's I think it's an amazing tool of shaitan to manipulate and just kind of dismantle very subtly, you know, just human values, because it makes everything a commodity. Um, and yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess. Oh, okay. Did it die? Okay. I think we got most of the initial talk.
How do you, I mean, I don't know how, like, raising kids at a time like this. I don't know if you're sending your kids to, like, public school or if you're planning to do that, but it's literally, they're like, the way that they're, like, indoctrinating kids
Yes.
is actually insane. And I know it's been, like, they've been shedding a lot of light on it recently. And I watched that whole episode of
The Dean Show one.
and that was so disturbing.
It's
Like, I showed my mom. I like forced her to watch it. She like couldn't watch it. She was like, it's so scary. It's crazy. I'll send it to
I
you.
think my dad sent me that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's literally so disturbing. So
And I had went over to my sister, and then she's a middle, I don't know, she goes to the SFC Buyer, and she was like, the teacher was talking about like gender and how every gender, like you could be any gender you wanted.
yeah, yeah. And
right.
the thing is, yeah, and they don't tell the parents anymore. So it's literally like, I don't know how. What's your
It's no, before I even had kids, before I was Muslim, I didn't intend to have kids because what's the point? When you're living that kind of like very self-centered, fatalistic kind of depressing existence, you don't want to have kids. But as soon as I became Muslim, I knew I wanted to homeschool my kids. And we had twins first, and I kind of chickened out because that's a lot. We ended up with 4 in 4 years. And so it was like, I don't think I'm qualified to do that. So we tried them. We started them at Crescent View, and they were in the pre-K. They're like, I went and interviewed the teachers and like harassed the principal to like find out how legit this was, how Islamic of an Islamic school is this, how many kids per class. They were in there they started like, I guess, the semester before COVID. And I actually pulled them out like the week before they closed the school because I was following this like in January and was like bleaching all my groceries back then. And no, now I'm trying to go on with homeschooling them, which is what I felt like I wanted to do initially, anyways, for so many reasons. But yeah, I feel like it's a huge responsibility they're not accountable yet. You know what I mean? They're forming as human beings, and us as parents are 100% going to answer for how that process goes. And I want to try, and I'm not perfect. I don't have a infinite well of patience. I wish I did, but I feel like it's because I'm blessed enough to be able to keep them home. My mom lives with us, so she can help, like she can watch them when I need to come do stuff here. Since we have the opportunity, I felt like I had to try and homeschool them, at least for the first kind of formative years, give them a good foundation. I don't ever intend to put them in public school. No, absolutely not. I understand that that's the only option for some people, and my heart just breaks for those parents, especially Muslim parents that have to put their kids in public school, because I can't imagine how terrifying that must be to send your kid off to who knows where to be taught by who knows who with 30 other kids that you can't pick, that you can't control what their mouths say while your kids are around them. So that's a big trial. And I think I was actually talking with a sister. Where was she from? I think she was from Saudi, and she was like moving to the UK or something, and she was really stressing out about like, how do you raise Muslim kids in a non-Muslim environment? I was like, well, Saudi isn't exactly the ideal Muslim environment. I mean, the Kaaba is there, but that doesn't necessarily mean like they own Islam. They've got a lot of their own weaknesses. There's a lot of culturalism and things. And I feel like in the West, the obligation is on the parents just as it is anywhere else, but you don't have the community to make up for the gaps that you leave behind. So you've got to be much more cognizant of the fact that this kid is coming home to you every night. They're looking at you for the example, and you have to really kind of step up and be sure that you're being the best Muslim you can be so that they observe that. And even if they don't internalize it now, inshallah, they get a little older and they kind of realize, like, this is the way I need to go. I need to stop messing around with all of these other people and focus. Yeah, it's because you're battling just the way that kids are taught to learn here. Everything is, again, everything is subjective, everything is opinion, and you can't question anybody else's opinion, and you should just accept it at face value. And it's affecting the whole way that your brain works. So it's difficult to overcome that, I'm sure. Right, right. It's no, it's a challenge, and I think, I wonder how you parent a kid if you don't have like that fitra and like these clear-cut guidelines, because I'm constantly looking for hadith, looking for verses, like what do I do in this situation, how do I teach this specific thing, looking for some sort of reference point. And I really wonder how parents that don't have that, like, do you just change what you're teaching them every 6 months or so when like culture changes its mind and like moves on to something else? Because it used to be, when I was in school, there was two genders. I'm not that old. And now it's like, okay, no, actually there was three, and now there's as many as you want. There's, name it. You can come up with your own. And same with sexuality. There was, the basics when I was a kid. They were teaching that homosexuality was a thing, but they weren't really going into it. And now it's just like, again, whatever you want, marry the Eiffel Tower. It's cool. We're not going to judge you for that. So I can't get my head around trying to parent, when everything is that fluid and undetermined, when you don't even know what the answer is. How do you teach your kid? It seems like there's going to be a generation of very confused people coming up in the world, but maybe every generation feels like that, because I think things change pretty quickly. So that's also possible. So you guys mentioned social issues last time. What were there any specific other things you had in mind as far as we could just chat about today and we could kind of delve in deeper later? Politics. I want to prepare a talk on, what's that? Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. Yeah. Well, yeah, I was watching an interview with what's his name? Chris Christie, who was saying like they were in the room during debate prep and like nobody had a mask on, and now Chris Christie has it too. So basically the whole White House and like half the Republican Party, basically. Right. Yeah, it could go so many ways because when you're dealing with someone who doesn't believe in reality, we're talking about objective and subjective. To someone like Trump, everything is subjective. It's what he says it is right now, and in 10 minutes it could be something different. You cannot reason with someone like that. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Allahu Alam. Yeah, I want to do like a session about voting specifically and really go into that. I'm not prepared to do that today because I need to do some more research. I want to be really solid on my sources before I go into that, because it's one of those things that did not exist in this form at the time. So it's all ijtihad. It's all, based on trying to use our reasoning and comparing to similar situations at the time. We did not have, a functioning republic with 50 giant states and, however many million people in it at the time, and an electoral college, and like that just wasn't a thing. So it's like saying our cell phones are halal. That's not, it's not as simple as like yes or no, so I do want to, maybe next session I'll be ready for that. We'll see if my daughter lets me sleep anytime in the next 2 weeks. The schedule from here on, inshallah, is going to be every 2 weeks. So not this coming weekend, but the one after, inshallah. And for now, it's just going to stay Saturday Asr to Maghrib, basically, and we'll kind of wrap it up whenever it's done. I did order pizza, So that should be here like now, but we'll see. If y'all aren't still here, I'll just take it home. Oh yeah, race issues is a big one. That's